I think Meyer was kind of a legacy, right? Been around since the 60s, really created what the vacation rental industry was and is in our market. But for, new up and comers, I'm currently with Current Tides Vacation Rentals, who's been around since 2019. So in the grand scheme of things, very new to the space. And I think you just have to be creative. The phrase, you don't have to be the best, but you have to be their favorite, I think really speaks to someone trying to get into this market, because it is so heavily saturated that you can't just jump in with what worked 6 years ago.
Wow. So I'd never heard that quote before. I love that quote.
Oh.
What are some ways that you might do that if you were just advising a new entrant to a market?
Yeah, absolutely. So on a certain level, I think we have over automated hospitality. And especially with the saturation in the Gulf Shores and Orange Beach market, you can't just create these automated responses to your guests and make it a very transactional experience, because they could get that elsewhere. You've got to make it more personal. You've got to add the touches that really set you apart so that they remember, I want to book with Current Tides. I don't just want to book with Airbnb. And I think that's what helps set us apart, is making sure that we do have the authentic relationship with our guests and homeowners. I think in our industry with such wonderful tech options, we don't always consider whether we should just because we can. So if a guest leaves a review, positive or negative, about a property, rather than having an automated auto replier, make sure that the conversation is tailored so that they feel heard, whether good or bad about the situation, and making it a true experience for them. So that's on the back end. But on the front end, performing welcome calls is highly effective in, one, creating brand awareness, but also the big dogs are not always making those personal connections. So you could, we have a VIP program where we leave, swag and branded items, but really just making it feel like there's a person on the other end of that, host situation. When I think back to where Airbnb kind of started, when you think about being able to contact the host directly, this is their home, this is their investment, this is something they genuinely care about. And I think in our market, specifically on the Alabama beach, it can get lost as a very, we know what we're doing. We're the big guys in the area. And it feels far more like a hotel experience where you're just being, heads in beds. So it's just nice to harken back to some of those values that really you think about when you think about the vacation industry from the outside looking in.
I put myself in those shoes as often as I can, the outside looking in, like go consider staying in a vacation rental somewhere where I don't happen to have a colleague. And let's just mention how weird it is that we who are in the industry already and attend industry events, like we hang out with the best operators in the world. If we don't have a friend who happens to have a vacation rental company in any given destination, we're kind of like crossing our fingers that we're going to find something that is decent. That's a pretty sad state of affairs for the average consumer.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And I think awareness of booking direct and having those personal conversations with the people who manage these homes day in and day out is something, it's a message that's so important, but it can be equally as difficult to get out because for better, for worse, relying on the bigger names can give a false sense of security in those, financial transactions that are being made.
I'm Matt Landau from VRMB, and this is Unlocked, Season 12, Unlimited Edition, the case for more creativity in business. And today's episode features Dixie Taylor, who's the Director of Operations at Current Tides Vacation Rentals in Gulf Shores, Alabama, which is a super saturated, mature vacation rental market, which makes it a really interesting indicator for a lot of other markets around the country and the world. Now, I titled this episode Her Next Big Leap, not because Dixie has necessarily a big leap in mind, although she's always contemplating something, but more because Dixie took a big leap upon leaving her old gig. And as you'll hear, there's something about Dixie's awareness recognizing when she's new to a place, but also recognizing when a place is starting to become a little bit boring and when it's time for her to grow. I think it's recognizing that there is an unknown beyond that limit that she's comfortable stepping into that makes Dixie very creative and very courageous. And it's that balance of stepping into something new while keeping your foot on reality that makes for a very sustainable, very dynamic kind of personal and professional growth. I love this episode more than anything because it's like a perfect primer for anybody looking to optimize their vacation rental business. Dixie has been doing this as long as anyone and with some of the best companies that anyone could hope for. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by OwnerRez, which is a property management software which fits really interestingly into the conversation that I'm about to have with Dixie when it comes to automation and technology's role in the future of hospitality. Because as you will hear, Dixie points out it can be very powerful to deploy a piece of technology, a tool, or an algorithm at any given point in the customer journey or in your operational flow. That is like the best use of this cutting-edge software. But at the same time, you want to use those opportunities to free up time to focus on the more human, one-off elements that make hospitality special. And this is the area that I feel a lot of operators tend to overlook. It's also a sweet spot that I think a lot of property management software don't give nearly as much attention to. Automating the stuff that is redundant or manual so that you, the home runner, can free up time and focus on more individualized and personalized experience-based interactions. This is where the future is at. I actually facilitated the OwnerRez company retreat last year after its co-founder and CEO, Paul Waldschmidt, attended one of our Keystone retreats, the same retreats that Dixie will talk about in just a second. What I took away from both of those experiences with Paul is that this business is about much more than optimizing and standardizing and scaling metrics. You have to prioritize the human, the authentic, the real in your business. Otherwise, it gets obscured and ultimately fades away. If you'd like to do a demo with OwnerRez, mention the code VRMB30 to get 30% off your subscription for the first 3 months. Now let's get back to our interview with Dixie.
I was 19 years old. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought the beach was cool. And, if working in an office 3 miles from the beach got me that much closer, great. So I took the role and pretty quickly I was hired on full time. And I think to really insert the premise here for Unlimited Edition, every single position that I took on almost felt like my next white whale. So I thought at the time, the best position that I could think of being when I was a second shift reservation agent was to manage that department. That was my goal. And within 5 years, I did that. And I was shocked when I realized that there could be more. This peak that I had worked toward for so long, you eventually start naturally shedding off the wow factor once you've mastered that role and you're ready for your next big leap, which, it's just a remarkable experience, especially at such a young age that I was able to experience that and really lean in new positions in new ways.
I want to touch on a couple of things that you shared there. One, how interesting is it that the location in which we live, you moving to the beach to be able to work 3 miles from me, changes our everything, right? It changes like how we feel. Choosing a new place to live, for me, at least, I moved to Miami back in 2020. It really awakened my senses. Mm-hmm. And I feel so great here. And I know that feeling great here rubs off on everything else that I do. Did you notice that effect when you first moved to the coast?
So interestingly enough, as you were saying that, I almost had a bounce back. So I moved to Gulf Shores. I loved living there. The cost of living can be high, but eventually I met my now husband and we bought a house in Robertsdale, which I never thought we would do. For reference, that's 45 minutes to an hour north of the beach, depending on traffic. And we have chickens and we have this beautiful life that I grew up with and hated. So I think, growing up on 40 acres in the panhandle of Florida, which is coincidentally where I'm podcasting from today, I never wanted that farm life. And now I've got the best of both worlds. I'm, working on the beach every day, but also getting to raise chickens with a man that I adore. So it's really those, additional steps that you take throughout your life that bring you to where you're supposed to be.
You sort of started finding each of these new peaks. And that's a nice feeling if you have the courage to take that step.
Absolutely.
Up, out, in a direction that not familiar with. For me, at least, I hit something of a ceiling in the sense that I felt like there was only a limited amount of places to go. And I kind of needed to make a leap. Okay. And you and I had talked about leaps a great deal. You attended one of our Keystone retreats last year, which is where I really got to meet you for the first time and really admire everything that you bring to this calling. I was wondering if you could share kind of the scenario leading up to your next big leap.
Absolutely. So thanks for that, Matt. The Keystone Retreat was a remarkable experience. I have praised it to this day. Having a concentrated number of strangers over the course of 3 days just pour out their souls to one another is a remarkable experience to attend. So shout out for that to anyone who is interested in attending. It's worth it. But I think as part of that, you realize your obstacles that may be in the way of what your next big leap is, or even, peeling off the layers of an onion to realize that there are more leaps out there. So for me personally, I think my dream one day, is to help vacation rentals, specifically startups, in an advisory role. And maybe, the things that you don't think about are different ways to tackle that problem. That's what really inspires me. And I think that it's always been my trajectory, taking on, 8 different positions in 8 years with Meyer Vacation Rentals. And then, kind of where we went from there. But never say no to adventure is a great way to kind of synopsize my next big leap, because you really don't know what's out there unless you're willing to jump. And I am thankful that I am a person who's willing to jump. So,
do you think for those who are not as willing to jump, what do you think helps those who are not as willing to jump?
Well, I think the biggest obstacle there is not knowing where you want to jump to. So if you feel passionately about something, that helps that fear right out the window. And I think in a world that doesn't always allow for alternative ideas, or limiting beliefs is a great phrase to use here. I can't imagine a world that I don't know where I'd go from the place that I'm in. So imagine I'm working in a grocery store, and the only next move I can think of is being a supervisor of my shift and then a supervisor of the store. There's so much out there that you could tackle and bring a part of yourself to, but it's really understanding that you don't have to put yourself in that box. And some of that, I think, is the way that you're raised. But I also think that there's just an awareness of listening to podcasts or really diving into what content could be out there to really open your horizons.
One of the things that came to mind as you were saying that was also traveling places, which is an adventure unto itself. Going somewhere is a scary thing, really, for a lot of people, myself included. Like, that's part of the whole deal, is that it's a little bit scary. You're leaving your comfort zone, you're leaving your home, and you're going somewhere new. And to a degree, you don't know what's going to happen. And I've always felt that travel experience enhances my awareness. one way or another, I come back from any trip different, just a little bit more connected. Have you ever taken a trip somewhere that really had this impact on you?
So it's interesting you mention that. So the Keystone Retreat is a really great example of this for me because I had never in my 30 years of life traveled somewhere alone, especially not to meet strangers.
In the woods.
In the woods in Texas, which I had also never been to. So while I have traveled, never have I traveled alone. So I loaded up my backpack and I was ready to pet some horses and hang out at a campfire. And so I think that was such a liberating experience because I would hazard to say a large majority of people don't get an opportunity like that to just genuinely be themselves without preconceived notions and join in to something that has a shared goal. And I think that was a really great opportunity for me. Now, what is also funny is I hate going to a post office. I feel like there's this like set expectation of how we're supposed to manage this transaction. And that feels so strange to me. So I would much rather hop on a plane to, hit a Spring Lake than I would go to a post office. So there, it's just an interesting avenue.
You mentioned being a more authentic version of yourself. Have you, can you recall a time that you didn't feel like an authentic version of yourself?
So what immediately comes to mind is the transition between Meyer Vacation Rentals and where I am today. We were acquired by a larger company. Some of you might be able to guess who that may be, but I knew immediately that that was not a good fit for me. And I was placed in a role that had great benefits and had fantastic, work-life balance. But at the end of the day, I wasn't going anywhere in that role. And I didn't feel like I was able to be authentic with my team because it was such a corporate structure that I wasn't used to, they weren't used to. And I don't know that it was a good fit for our industry either, at least in that area in Gulf Shores, Norwich Beach. So for me, that was a time in my career that I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Did I want to be in this industry? Did I want to continue? Because I had those limiting beliefs that I couldn't take a next big leap to somewhere else that I may be more comfortable. And I think that time in my life was great for some reflection. I took 3 months off between the two roles and before joining Current Tides, which I'm super happy to be there. But that time in my life, that 90 days, was taking back control of me, feeling like a person. The first day that I woke up not gainfully employed was one of the most liberating experiences of my life. And it let me realign everything that I was looking to do.
What was going through your head that morning?
So this sounds so hippy dippy, but I actually went and stood out in the grass in the sun and just,
I love it,
was a person for a long time. And it genuinely felt like I was reconnecting to who Dixie Taylor is. So I know that sounds silly, but it was. Exactly
no, that sounds so, it sounds like cinematic.
It was, genuinely, it was a reality that hit me that my time is my own. I'm not gainfully employed. And I actually used the phrase gainfully unemployed that whole time frame. And it really did help shift my mindset into where I wanted to go moving forward. I knew I wanted a place that was open to new ideas, that I knew I could make an impact for them. I didn't want a preconceived role that I would be plugged into and expected to, check these boxes. If I am nothing, I am not a box checker. So roles that require moving, paper from the left side of the desk to the right side before the end of the day is not for me. So I knew that had to be the right fit. I needed to be a conversation where they were open to growth. And also I knew that my expertise would come in handy because some of the conversations I had, I knew that their trajectory was not something that I could necessarily benefit them in.
What would you say specifically was your expertise?
People leadership from a young age, which is difficult. I mean, I'd say 90% of the individuals that I've managed have been significantly older than me. I became a people leader at 25 years old and had managed a team at Meyer of, 36 individuals between 3 different departments. So my ability to understand interworkings of the team was greatly benefited. And I will say my short time at the more corporate company after the acquisition, that is the one takeaway that I will say really benefited me as a person, was the ability and open space to really connect with my team, to have the concept of one-on-ones, to have the concept of an all-hands team meeting. Those really weren't in, the first part of my career. So that takeaway was invaluable to me from that more corporate structure, and I could take that to my next team. So really teaching and leading as best I could in a way that felt organic, because I knew what it was like to get out there and clean a condo. I knew what it was like to, book a reservation with a very chatty guest. So I felt like I could connect on each of those roles.
Is that something that you'd encourage anyone who wants to lead people better to do, is to have more frequent in-person team space?
Absolutely. And I think there's a fine balance between over-structured and lack of presence. So it can be far more organic than, okay, on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. we meet and have a face-to-face meeting for 30 minutes. And then we, go over an eval. That feels very inauthentic, but really having a team that you feel is bought in and that you are bought in with them and you can approach those struggles together is extraordinarily important for any people leader. And I'm thankful to have had several very, very good people leaders in my life, and several not so good that taught me just as much as the good ones. And so I think because I moved around so much early in my career, as far as departments go or scopes of view, I was able to see a lot of different perspectives.
And may I just recommend you put a little space in between the words people and leader, because otherwise they're going to think you're talking about people eaters.
You do have to enunciate.
So if a team is looking to grow in this, I think, very creative, outside the box kind of way, our industry, it does require such adaptation, and it's always different. It's always changing. What are some ways that you are able to, as a team leader, a people leader, are able to encourage some of that outside the box thinking, but keeping that balance, the kind of structure that you mentioned?
Absolutely. There's so many creative ways that we've kind of dabbled in and experienced. I think one great way is every team member gets $100. You get $100 a month or a week to do what you think makes an impact. So whether that's going and buying a birthday cake for a guest that is coming in for that event, or if one of my favorite examples, a guest was having a memorial service for a family member that had stayed in the home years and years and years. This was their family vacation spot, and their matriarch of the family had passed, and the lights were out on the dock. And the guests were so upset because they wanted to have their memorial service on the dock. And not to get too in the weeds, but we couldn't get an electrician out. There was very little that we could do locally to make this experience better for them before they departed. But someone on the team went to the dollar store and bought tea lights and lined the entire dock in these tea lights so that they could have their memorial service. And that $38 meant more to them than any of the service calls or, compensation adjustments that we could have made to just throw money at a problem. So I think thinking outside the box to make a difference is what this hospitality industry is all about.
What a beautiful, beautiful story. I think there's a kind of pattern that I'm sensing. So you had to recognize it was a moment to be creative. That team member who turned lemon into lemonade, who went out and bought the lights, had to recognize, oh, this is a moment. This is my creative cue, as opposed to what a lot of these other companies will do, just follow a script.
Absolutely. And I think So compensation guidelines is a phrase that's used a lot, So if the dryer's out, it's 15% off per day that they don't have their dryer, or, these set structures. And I think more than 50% of the time, I'd say the guest doesn't want money back. The guest wants their problem resolved and to be heard. And I think that we have a lot more latitude to do that than we think we do. And so having, the old saying of put yourself in their shoes does tend to ring true. If you were in this situation, what resolution could you think of that doesn't involve dollars and cents? And I think empowering your team to think that way and to act in that way is crucial for this industry.
I'm not aware of much training, if any, that exists in our industry for that.
I don't disagree. I think that now that you mention it, that is a huge portion of what we do, and it's not something that we talk about. And we, to use the same phrase, we over automate hospitality. So we do have a script, especially when you're dealing with a larger call center or it's outsourced in some way. You've just lost control over the relationship that you've been trying so hard to build.
And in a way, that relationship building is what the skill set should encompass. And it's something that we don't really talk about ever at our conferences or stuff like that.
No, I would definitely agree with that. And I think we have a lot to learn from educators in the way that, especially early childhood education and the way that they interact with their students. That's a huge opportunity that we could have to just sit and listen and understand. Or there's certainly plenty of industries that does a better job than we do in helping from a holistic approach. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for additional training. But more to the point, I think when we're looking for a new hire, we were just actually talking about this. We don't necessarily need someone who knows hospitality. We need someone who understands personal relationships, especially in a role that deals primarily with our guests and homeowners. I can teach you how to wipe a counter, right? I can teach you how to stage soap and toilet paper. But what I need you to come to me with is this desire for personal connection.
And in addition, the back to the creative line, this is something we talked about in Texas together. If creative problem solving is something that you as an organization really value, and you're hiring people, you can ask in the interview, do you consider yourself a creative person? You can ask them to share a creative problem solving scenario, and you can pretty quickly tell if someone understands what you're talking about or not. Right?
So my favorite interview technique is to make them extraordinarily uncomfortable. So we'll ask some standard interview questions, get to know you, but then I might ask, why do you think a tennis ball is fuzzy? Or, there's not a right or wrong answer, but I just want you to be able to think on your feet, give me something authentic, and have some personality behind it, because those key factors let me know that in the midst of a struggle between a disappointed guest and yourself, that you're able to make a real judgment call that's going to be impactful. So thinking on your feet is one of the best attributes that someone could have in this industry.
Wow, I love that. And then are you actively encouraging, once they become a team member, to channel that authentic bit when they're problem solving? Are you recognizing it? Are you compensating extra for that sort of thing?
So I would love to say that we do. My love does extend to them when I see those opportunities arise. But I would say it's not something that we capitalize on enough.
It's just kind of a thing in the culture of the organization that this is what we do.
Well, and fostering autonomous ownership of what your goals are, what your duties are, and not having a babysitter mentality for your team. I think I have certainly been in situations where I've inherited a team that's been babysat, and it is a very difficult position to work yourself out of. So for all of that said, I think making sure that your team feels like they can solely by themselves make an impact on the situation without permission or guidance from someone else is extraordinarily important. And I hope that my team feels that way.
Just to touch on that babysitting comment, because I think a lot of people, especially smaller operators, you kind of have to babysit in a way if you're going to bring on some people at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. But for sure, everyone that I know at least is a real control freak and has issues delegating and ends up becoming the chief babysitter of the organization as it grows. You said it's a very difficult situation to get yourself out of. But I'm curious, what would like your advice be to someone who's sensing that maybe they're close to getting stuck?
So that's a really interesting point of view, because I think there are people who delegate well and people who don't. So when it comes to being a comfortable people leader, you just have to know what your boundaries are. You have to set some clear expectations between yourself and the things that you silently follow up on without it being this regular, overwhelming presence for the team. So for me, I need a closed loop. So if I see a problem has arisen, I won't say something. I'll wait. Let's see how, if they resolve it. Do they kick the can? Do we have an action? And then show me that there's a resolution. I rarely have to interact with my team because they know that that's a sticking point for me in that way. So they know, close the loop or Dixie's going to ask. So I think it helps to not be so nervous that something's going to go wrong, because if you've got the right training in place and you've got the right team members on the bus, they will make it happen for you. But if they feel micromanaged, that's a very good way to make, I was going to say weaponized incompetence, but that seems a little harsh.
Oh God. Yeah, quite an extreme.
Sorry. So
this is like the first way to start a world war.
We'll pivot there. But just fostering a team that can really work autonomously is so important. And as a people leader, if you potentially feel like you're in a position where you don't trust your team, evaluate why that is. If you can't take a week of vacation without trusting that the organization won't burn to the ground, then you either need more training or a different team or a different management approach. And it can be a combination of those three. But I think building that trust from day one and cutting your losses. If it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit, to make sure that you have built a team that can be a cohesive unit.
Wow. Okay. I love that. So we talked about what it was starting to feel like getting stuck. We talked about the beginnings of your next big leap. I can't wait to hear, because I haven't gotten the full update from you, but ever since I saw you, like, what is going on in Dixie's world, in Current Tides land? What's the status?
Yeah. So we are rocking and rolling on both accounts. For Current Tides, we recently made a small acquisition. So we are almost up to 80 properties in our portfolio in less than 5 years, which is remarkable. And I'm very proud to be part of a team that's building this way. We've got a long road ahead of us because we're just now getting into those properties and really seeing what it is we've acquired. But I think it's a really great opportunity to start from scratch with a good handful of properties and see where we can get them to. So that's a really great opportunity. And I think that kind of reignited me in some ways, for someone who does want new perspectives and maybe pivots in my role every year or two. This was a really good way to reignite me in what we do and why we do it. That's actually a really common phrase we use, is why Current Tides? Why would a guest choose us? Why would a homeowner choose us? And why do our employees want to be part of what we're building? So we never want to lose sight of why we do what we do. As far as on the home front, things are well as well. I do, I mentioned before, at some point hoping to be an advisor in some way. I haven't dabbled too much into that, but I think I've kind of been gathering data, right? As you have these conversations, as you do chat with other professionals in the industry and know what struggles they wish they would have known how to avoid at the beginning. And I think that's super important. So it's certainly not something that I would start tomorrow, but it's really good to know what people need and what would benefit this industry best.
And most importantly, what you are most excited about doing, because I can hear in your voice, like for the last 2 minutes, you've just been like so absolutely thrilled to share this stuff. And that, first of all, is the only thing that matters. It rubs off on everyone and everything that you're doing as a leader, right? But two, it changes. Like a year from now, you may have gotten into something else you're excited about.
Absolutely. And that leads us right back to the Dixie interpretation of unlimited edition. I think as we continue to learn about ourselves and capitalize on our strengths, you just naturally start moving in those directions. And what was Mount Everest is now just another peak, and we can keep rolling. So I think as long as you stay excited about it, and as long as you feel like you're in the right place, just lean in.
Wow. Okay. I will.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
sold. Like, where do I sign up? Are you, like in my world, taking the leap is a first step, and then you get a little bit more familiar with what taking the leap feels like, and you start to kind of sense out when something is kind of good, uncomfortable territory.
So I want to take it back, actually. For you, you said that taking a leap was the first step. I almost view it as one of the later steps, because for myself, I've, mulled it over and I've thought about it and I've journaled about it. And then when I'm finally ready to take that leap, it's almost like it's the last step in that process before a new horizon. So it's just interesting that you mentioned it was a first step for you.
Love that perspective.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So now I don't remember what your question was.
For me, I'm starting to get a little bit more familiar with what it feels like to step into the unknown. And it's still terribly disorienting and scary, and I'll avoid it at all costs unless I'm really holding myself, honestly to it. I'm starting to get a little more familiar with good unknown, like a little more comfortable with recognizing, oh, this is a space that I would like to learn more about, that is making me feel something new or excited in a new way. Are you starting to develop the same kind of radar?
So it's interesting you mentioned that. I have always been curious about the way other markets do business. And I know that sounds simple, but it's true. All I know is sugar white sand. So what they're doing in a ski market, what they're doing in a cabin market, that fascinates me, because there are some fundamental things that we have to tackle differently. I never once have I plowed snow. I'm not sure what that reality would be like from a vacation rental standpoint. So I think for me, learning as much as I can, before a next big leap, to really know what struggles are out there, but also just the different perspectives of those who are doing it day in and day out. So as far as the unknown, I think that's really where I'm focusing my energy, is understanding those market needs and how I could benefit them, for lack of a better phrase.
I was just sitting down to write this week's newsletter, and my theme is the case for more adventures as a business cost. Not a business investment, like there might be a return someday, but like a cost of doing business should have an element of adventure for the leader, ideally the entire team if possible, for the leader to go on an adventure and have their senses awakened, whether it's a little trip to the, supermarket down the street or an actual trip somewhere, go on an adventure and coming back and sharing it. And I was thinking about how that as a routine, almost like a part of what we do in order to do all the other stuff, is worth like reevaluating for people who maybe just used to, assign adventure to a vacation or every once in a while or accidentally.
That's really interesting. So it's not something I've thought of much, but the first thing that came to mind was actually a topic that's really big in the industry at the moment, which is the, work leisure travel. So you might be going to a conference in, let's say, Orlando, and you have the opportunity to extend your stay past the conference, bring the family, and spend a week at Disney. And I think opening our understanding of work-life balance, which is a phrase I hate, by the way. It's more of a work-life blend
Yes.
at worst. It really should feel more organic. Very few of us in this industry are holding down a chair from 9 to 5. So I think the way that we view the role, it is very important. But really understanding that you can mix the two and have that adventure plays into what we do as well from a revenue standpoint. If we know that we're a destination market for travel ball, that's really big in our market. We can capitalize on those families that might want to extend their stay to really enjoy time at the beach after the tournaments are over. So I think that not only from a benefit to the personnel, but also from an industry and revenue generator, really exploring that concept.
Yay. Okay. Thank you for playing along with me. One for follow-up. How would you define adventure if we were to, give it a definition?
Define adventure. So I love little adventures. So just as a quick aside, we went on a road trip, a short road trip last month through Georgia. So we went up, we hit Atlanta, we did the Coke factory. We went up to Helen, Georgia, which is about this big, smaller than I expected. But one of the highlights of the trip was the Cabbage Patch Hospital. That was the big adventure, right? I don't own a Cabbage Patch doll, or I didn't before I went to this Cabbage Patch Hospital, but that's where Cabbage Patch babies are born. So they do a whole ceremony where Mother Cabbage births a cabbage baby. And it was the most strange experience that I did not expect. They had, vintage incubators from the 50s where it was an experience. And genuinely, that was the adventure. I think experiencing something that was far better than you expected and absolutely puts you out of your comfort zone. That's what adventure means to me. And so had I planned to thoroughly enjoy the Cabbage Patch Hospital, maybe I would have had a different view, but I went into this with no expectations and a free entry ticket. And that was the adventure.
And learning to see the world through these little adventures, like you just described, I think is what makes life worth living. I mean, it's what makes the most boring day memorable. It's what makes things fun.
Absolutely, it does. And I think if you over plan to make those memories, that's where you get off track. Just enjoy the experience. Let the adventure guide you.
Or overthink, because I think a lot of us we want to analyze everything always, and we forget to feel.
Oh, it's very true. And I think so the idea of a brain dump is super, I guess, popular when it comes to influencers and that kind of thing, but it's a truly valuable experience. And if you don't know what that is, let's say you're planning for a trip and you've got all these thoughts and ideas and you're worried about your travel plans and, how much is this ticket on this railway versus this one? Brain dump that. Literally sit down with a sheet of paper and jot it all down. This can apply to anything, a trip, a work meeting, whatever it is that's giving you anxiety. Your brain is for having thoughts, not for retaining them. So if you can get them on paper, you can start to make sense of all of that. And it doesn't have to be this overthinking process. You can really just evaluate what's in front of you once it's all out of your brain.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Dixie as much as I did. My favorite moment of the conversation, and that which I really haven't stopped thinking about since we originally recorded it, is how the leaders in hospitality have to sit down and have a new kind of conversation with ourselves a new creative discovery process to identify where are these areas in our business where a human intervention is worth its weight in gold. There is no playbook or standard operating procedure here. It's going to be different for everyone and every business and every market. But sitting down to have these more creative conversations with our team in which there is no right or wrong. There's simply brainstorming. Dixie calls it the brain dumping. This is a process that we need to exercise more frequently. It's like a muscle that needs to be incorporated into any adaptable and agile vacation rental business of the future. And I just appreciate so much how lovely Dixie was able to articulate that, all with this wonderful, upbeat, motivated energy. And if you're in the position to explore a new property management software, if you're thinking about aligning with a new kind of business whose business values are more in line with yours, head over to ownerres.com and let them know you heard about them on this podcast. They'll offer 30% off your subscription for the first 3 months. Until next time.